What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel for another episode of the Ask Me Anything series. I hope you all had a great weekend. A ton of fantastic questions this episode. I appreciate every single one of you who took the time and left a question on the post. Even the questions that I don't choose to get answered in the video, just know I read every single one and I appreciate all of you guys. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. This first question comes from Denku, who says, everyone talking about Ovi being the greatest goal scorer of all time, but do you think that Matthews will by end of his career surpass Ovi? And thank you for the kind words. I'm honestly surprised this isn't something that's brought up more often, especially with how, prevalent the Leafs and Austin Matthews is amongst Canadian media. Fun fact, actually, amongst NHL players all time who have at least 200 career goals, Austin Matthews is 5th in terms of goals per game at 0.641. He's actually ahead of Alexander Ovechkin. Now, I'm not going to say that I think he'll surpass Ovechkin by the end of his career. I don't think he will, just because, who's to say Austin Matthews' game ages anywhere close to as well as Ovechkin's game has aged over the years. But I will say, based off of the career trajectory of Austin Matthews at this point, I don't think it's too crazy to say that by the end of his career, he will finish a lot closer to Ovechkin in terms of career goals than some people may think. Moving along to the next question, this one comes from HS Tower, who says, thoughts on Tyler Boucher? People are already using the term bust for him because of his lack of offensive output. Do you think he will bounce back? I'll be the first to admit I'm not the greatest analyst when it comes to prospects. Obviously, my main focus is players in the National Hockey League. I really haven't seen much of Tyler Boucher play at all, but based off of his numbers and where he was selected, which was 10th overall in the 2021 draft by Ottawa, and at the time, a lot of people saw that as a very off-the-board and kind of surprising pick. And I'll say I would definitely be concerned if I was a Senators fan based off of Boucher's offensive output this season, just 3 points in 17 games in the NCAA, and then in the OHL, just 14 points in 22 games. Those would be underwhelming offensive numbers for a winger that was drafted in like the second and third rounds. So the fact he was drafted 10th overall, I would definitely be a little bit concerned. Now, Tyler Boucher does have a little bit of a physical aspect to his game as well, but I feel like this is just a prime example of you could have got this player a lot later in the draft than where you selected him. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for a GM going out and getting the guy that they want and not taking a risk of another team selecting him, but this is a player that wasn't even really supposed to be drafted in the first round. I feel like they could have gotten him a lot later, just not like a couple of picks later. Next up, this question comes from, you can see the name on the screen, not even going to try to pronounce it because I'll just butcher it really bad, but the question is, love the content, keep it up, thank you. Question, who do you think will turn their franchise around first, Montreal or Detroit? I feel like a lot of people are going to call me biased on this one, but I do feel like it's the Red Wings. They've been in their rebuild a lot longer than Montreal. Obviously, Montreal was in the Stanley Cup Finals last year. They're kind of just entering their rebuild or retool, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, they were big sellers at the deadline, and I think they had a really good deadline gathering future assets. I think Justin Barron has looked pretty solid in the games he's played for Montreal. They definitely have a lot of great young players, but I feel like they're definitely still a little bit further behind in their rebuild as opposed to Detroit's, and that makes sense. Again, Detroit has been in their rebuild for a lot longer than Montreal has been in theirs. The next question comes from Abby Bai, who says, the Wild are 8-1-2 since the trade deadline. Do you think they can finally make a run, or is it just going to be another first round exit? And thank you for the kind words. I would be very surprised if the Wild don't win their first round matchup. If the season ended today, they would be playing St. Louis, and while I think that would be a good series, probably go 6 or 7 games, I like the Wild's overall team better. I think they would be able to win that. For me, the Western Conference as a whole, I would kind of rank things like Colorado is the #1 team, a little bit of a gap, then Calgary, and then probably a little bit bigger of a gap than Minnesota, and then a big gap and kind of like everyone else. I think that the 3 best teams in the Western Conference are without a doubt Colorado, Calgary, and Minnesota in that order. So I really like Minnesota's chances in a playoff series against any other team in the conference aside from Colorado and Calgary. I do think they could put up a fight against those 2 teams as well, but I'm not sure how confident I would be in them winning that series. This next question comes from Leighton N, who says, lots of people are comparing the Flames 2018-19 team to this 21-22 team. What big similarities and differences do you see between the 2 teams? I definitely think the biggest similarity would be the fact that Johnny Gaudreau played like an MVP candidate in the 18-19 season. He's playing like an MVP candidate again this season. The Flames' top line that season of Gaudreau, Monahan, and Tkachuk was one of the best lines in the entire league, and also this season season, Calgary has one of the best top lines in the entire league, except it consists of different players. You no longer have Monahan playing a big role. So those are definitely some similarities, but I think there's a lot of differences as well. I like this year's Calgary Flames team better than that 18-19 team by a pretty wide margin. I trust Jacob Markstrom in net a lot more than, David Riddick, who was kind of their starter that season. I think the Flames have a lot more depth up front this season as well than they did back in 2018-19, with the likes of Blake Coleman, bringing in Toffoli and Calle Yarncroke. And I think their team defense is a lot better as well, not just like the 6 defensemen that are in the lineup most nights, but the forwards as well, buying into the system, committing to playing a good 200-foot game. I think that's a big reason why Calgary has had such a successful season, and a lot of that I feel like can be attributed to, having Daryl Sutter behind the bench. Moving along now, this next question comes from BMOAW, who says, with both Oilers goaltenders playing very well the last 10 games or so, what do you think the team should do in the playoffs? Should they try to commit to one goalie, or should they swap back and forth? Maybe switch after every loss? Love commenting on these videos. Keep the content rolling. Thank you for the support. My answer to this is pretty simple, and the same goes for pretty much every team in the league. I think you just roll with the hot hand. Whatever goaltender is playing best at the time, that's who you want to put in net. And I feel like that's especially the case when you have kind of a tandem like the Oilers do and not really one solidified starter over the other. Of course, when it comes to a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, if Vasilevsky starts a series with 2 stinkers and they go down 0-2, you're most likely not going to your backup in game 3 and 4. You're still riding with Vasilevsky the whole time. The next question we have comes from Hatrick Kane, who says, do you think St. Louis has the best top 9 in the NHL? They're even catching dubs lately, and their scoring is so evenly distributed with their forward core. If they don't have the best top 9 in the NHL, you have to think it's at the very least top 5. They have such a deep group of forwards, especially with the emergence of players like Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas, Ivan Barbashev breaking out, acquiring Pavel Buchnevich and him having such a great season, Vladimir Tarasenko bouncing back. I could go on and on. They just have so many weapons up front. Just off the top of my head, the only top 9 this season that I can think of just right away that I would take over theirs is probably Florida's, because they have, the superstar talent with the likes of Barkov and Huberdeau, as well as a lot of great depth behind those guys, lines 1 through 3. Moving on now, this question comes from Joseph, who says, even though the Blue Jackets aren't making the playoffs, they were projected to finish last in the Metro by many. How would you rate their season? And also, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I think if you're a Columbus Blue Jackets fan, you have to be pretty happy with how the season has went. Obviously, this team had really no expectations at all heading into the season. Like you said, projected to finish last in the Metro by most, myself included. So the fact that they're not going to finish last in the Metro, I think that right there alone is a positive takeaway from this season. But then aside from that, in terms of individual players, a lot of bright spots. There was like a 2-month stretch where Patrick Laine was one of the most lethal offensive players in the league. Cole Sillinger making the team. I feel like that in and of itself, him making the team as an 18-year-old after being drafted, was kind of a surprise, and he's played solid this year. He hasn't looked out of place. If I were to grade the Blue Jackets season based off of the expectations that I had coming into the year for them, I would say it's probably around a B. Next up, this question comes from Senator Sal, who says, Rasmussen has been playing pretty good with Detroit the past 5 to 7 games. Do you think Rasmussen was worth the 9th overall pick? And thank you for the support. I don't really think Rasmussen's ever going to be worth the 9th overall pick. However, based off of what we've seen lately, I do feel a little bit stronger in the fact that I think there's a spot for Rasmussen on the Red Wings, even when they become a good team, when they start to turn the corner in this rebuild, as long as he continues to play the way he's playing, obviously, but Detroit continues to play him in the role he's been playing the past 5 to 7 games, and that's playing him on the wing. He's played center for the majority of this season and the majority of his career, and the results haven't been good, but in the small sample sizes we've seen of Rasmussen playing the wing, he's looked fantastic. He's looked a lot more comfortable. The next question we have comes from Mort, who says, is it okay to throw the last couple of games in the season for a better playoff matchup? I was thinking for the Rangers specifically, how Pittsburgh seems to be a more favorable matchup than Washington. This is kind of a tough thing to answer because you're never going to tell your players to go out there and try to lose, and even if you do, there's just no way NHL players are gonna, be okay with that and actually try to lose. They're just too competitive. I feel like if you're trying to, not win the last couple games in a season for a more favorable matchup, it comes down to just coaching in the front office, resting guys, because if you're playing your best players and you're telling them to go out there and try to lose, it's just probably not going to work. And even if you rest a bunch of guys and, play, maybe call some guys up from the AHL, play guys that are usually healthy scratches, there's still no guarantee that you lose those games because those guys are playing for contracts, right? They're still going to give it their all. I do think it's okay for teams to try and do this. I don't think there should be, any unwritten rules against it, and it doesn't mess up the integrity of the game. If you think that you're going to perform better in a playoff series against, team A as opposed to team B, and you have a chance to play team A, if you lose a couple games, then, why not go for it? But there's definitely no guarantee that it's even going to work. But then again, there's a chance it could. Like in the NBA this season, the Milwaukee Bucks, I feel like they probably should have finished as the number 2 seed, but they rested a lot of guys down the stretch, didn't really perform the greatest, and I feel like that was kind of on purpose so they could finish as the 3 seed and play the Chicago Bulls in round 1 instead of having a chance to play the Brooklyn Nets. Moving on now, this question comes from Tyler V, who says, although Vegas made it to the Cup Finals and had some good playoff runs, do you think they played being expansion team wrong? I can see them being a bottom feeder team in a few years because their roster has gotten so old with all these acquisitions. Meanwhile, Seattle will be able to build a sustainable team through the draft. This is a really interesting question. I'm going to say no, I don't think they played being an expansion team wrong. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to really play being an expansion team, to be honest. I feel like in Vegas's case, the fact that they were able to make the Stanley Cup Finals in year 1, just think about what that did for the popularity of the team, not just like worldwide, but just in Vegas alone. They probably got a ton of fans involved in hockey that weren't even really hockey fans before the team was there. And let's say Vegas is a bottom feeder team, 3-4 years from now. They still had, 7 seasons of being, one of the better teams in the league, with the exception of this year, of course. I honestly still feel like that would be worth it. I just think them coming out of the gate, as good as they did, making the Cup Finals in year 1 and, kind of sustaining that success, obviously not making the finals again since then, but being a consistent playoff team, again, with the exception of this year, really helped to build the fan base of the team. And if they could go back and redo things, I honestly don't think they would change much. I still think they would make a lot of the same moves that they've made. And now for the final question of the video, this one comes from Cole Bragg, who says, there has been talks about trading away Scheifele in the offseason to kind of shake things up for the Jets. Do you think it's a good move, or should they try something else? I definitely think it is time to shake up that core in Winnipeg, and I feel like Mark Scheifele would be the player that makes the most sense to trade. He's under contract through next season and the year after that, but then he's going to be a UFA. His cap hit is just $6.125 million, which is, I would say, a bargain for a guy who's been, a point-a-game player for the last 6 seasons. I just feel like the Jets have too many players like Scheifele, great offensive player, of course, but really doesn't do much at the other end of the ice at all. There's a lot of examples of Scheifele giving up on a play, not back-checking, and causing a goal against. I feel like surrounded by the right players, Scheifele's defensive deficiencies wouldn't really matter all that much, but in Winnipeg, they just don't really have the kind of players to, make up for that. Because Kyle Connor, while he's an amazing offensive player, kind of the same thing. He doesn't really, play well and really put 100% effort in at the other end of the ice. I definitely think it's time for change in Winnipeg, and not little changes either. I mean, they made a lot of little changes in the offseason, bringing in the likes of Brendan Dillon, Nate Schmidt. They did a lot to their blue line. Obviously, the line for Dubois trade was big, last year as well, but I think it's time for them to really shake up the core, move one of their veteran players up front, and I feel like Scheifele is a prime candidate for that. So that is going to wrap up today's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. I really hope you all did enjoy. If you want to see another episode next Monday, then be sure to drop a like on this video. That is the best way to show your support. And if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all soon.